Hey, it's Soul. We're back for another episode of Roleplay vs. Gameplay, where I take specific topics of gameplay in the World of Warcraft and try to make sense of what it means in a roleplay perspective, which also might mean trash talk on both sides of the aisle, but oh well. This episode is brought to you by the office of Andrew Miner. If you were affected by the Cataclysm, have a structured settlement or annuity, and need your cash now, call Andrew. He's only half goblin. Today's topic is related to a hot subject on the heels of a recent PTR build that revealed just a taste of what to expect from Azerite gear, the system that lets players collect and swap out gear from the chest, shoulder, and head slots to customize and tailor our character abilities. But for this second episode of RVG, we're looking at what happens before that, when we're fresh into an expansion and our characters are left thrown out of whack thanks to new systems and balance changes in part of Blizzard. These days, this can be defined with an overly simplistic term, pruning. Before the artifacts and the legendaries, the leveling perks and high-end enchants and set bonuses and, okay, well those are gone, but back to the Azerite stuff again, what do we have as a class at the start of a new expansion? Typically, it's not much. Speaking generally, what could possibly explain these sorts of changes through storytelling or meaningful gameplay? In many of these expansion transitions, to put it bluntly, you don't. Not without some really cringe-worthy mental gymnastics. This is the World of Warcraft, an MMO with numerous expansions and not any mere sequel to a game. In games of those types where you have the protagonist progress from one game to the next, the hero is sometimes depowered after completing the first stage where, at first they still feel like a badass and then they encounter some sort of humbling event and then rise back up to even greater heights than before to overcome that big bad something or other. That wouldn't work very well in WoW, or most MMOs for that matter. WoW has a particular pattern when it comes to an expansion. One that has no narrative, no pretense, it's just a set of patch notes and everything changes, because in this situation, there's no question of roleplay versus gameplay. The gameplay is always going to come first. For the sake of making these changes, it's going to handicap Blizzard's resources if they also had to write the narrative for why Hammer of Wrath went away for Paladins for a good while, only to come back in the battle for Azeroth. Or at least according to the current data, that's kind of how it's going right now. So the best that we as players can get away with, even if we wanted to make ourselves feel better, is like a little bit of headcanon. Take Light's Hammer, for example. An ability that all of the Paladin specs did have access to before it was shuffled away to exclusively be a holy spec kind of thing.
I, the brave Paladin tank, can no longer call upon the fury of Light's Hammer because, I'd rather have hammers swing in a circle around me instead.
Why not have the option to do both?
Shut up, Bob.
But that's a very, very good question. Using this ability as a very loose example, as in, God, don't kill me in the comments about this one, maybe it was dog poop for every spec except for Holy Paladins, so it happened to be moved there. Or someone thought of a cool ability for the other specs instead, but something had to move in order to make way. But here's what's both insidious and clever about the transition from Legion to Battle for Azeroth. The things we're losing, the artifact traits, the legendary gear, and set bonuses, are just that. It's tied to gear, and will naturally say goodbye to these things. So in this specific case, the roleplay to gameplay fits. It's probably a coincidence that this worked out.
This is still stupid.
Right. There's still that feeling of emptiness as we lower ourselves from the leader of our order halls empowered with this powerful weapon, and then become mere champions once again. The narrative of being depowered will come well before we set foot on the shores of Zandalar or Kul Tiras. It's gonna happen before the Battle of Lordaeron, and maybe sooner. As legendary gear degrades, our powers will continue to bleed out until we reach max level, and then really start getting into what hopes to be a great system in Azerite gear. This is Blizzard's excuse, and while some won't be convinced, I think that players will let them get away with intertwining class design around gear that we know will eventually abandon. But apart from what's happening specifically to legendaries and artifact weapons, is the underlying belief among critics that slowly but surely, classes are undergoing a pruning of abilities and talents. What was once baseline for many, many years suddenly becomes a talent, or even worse, a PvP talent, or is outright removed, or, in the case of poor demo warlocks, is given to a different class altogether. We're deviating from the roleplay aspect of this series for the sake of understanding just why these design changes even happen. I wouldn't call this a justification because I too miss having, say, Holy Prism as part of my protection toolkit. But I'm trying to wrap my head around this as to what is this compromise Blizzard had to make, but still stand in the shoes of our characters and classes and specs. Blizzard designed the champions in the World of Warcraft to be finite in their capacities, at least that's from my observation. Even going as far back as classic WoW, where a given character has all but the talent-related abilities available to them, it wasn't a good idea to use every ability that wasn't related to their specialization. Rotations, after all, can only be so long. It wasn't during Warlords of Draenor, but it was even earlier, during Mists of Pandaria, when classes fully embraced specializations and abilities being locked to those specializations. This pruning all happened sooner than some would realize. It was years before Blizzard started using the phrase turned part meme, class fantasy. Like it or not, it's Blizzard's way of defining classes by taking certain things like weapon types and glyphs and talents and set bonuses and artifact weapons and legendaries and making them very rarely interchangeable because, again, most of this is locked to spec. The extreme alternative would be to take all these talents and baked-in abilities per spec and meticulously place them on talent trees, so players can look at some website that tells them what to spec as, otherwise they'd be bad. Now, I'm only half joking. There are a lot of smart and helpful people out there who will share this information, but there are a lot of other people who will tell us to follow these directions or be kicked. And you know what? Maybe that agency should be left to us. Blizzard obviously disagrees with this. They're taking one system of equipable customization and replacing it with another, leaving the classes themselves dependent on what I'll identify as this modular system. It's attached to the character, but it's not exactly built in. The very nature of the Azerite gear and its ties to the heart of Azeroth already put it in my head that this is just another temporary system, and that as soon as the heart of Azeroth has served its purpose and is presumably no longer usable, the gear it synergizes with will fade into obscurity along with it. So the narrative is already kind of in place. That's nice. It fits into this video, yay. But it again puts the identity of our characters up into question, with half the class fantasy being defined by just what they wear. I'm not going to pretend that I have some brilliant solution, but I can't stop looking at what I think is the underlying problem. That while Blizzard wants to make the classes and specs unique, maybe it's time for the players to take that role. Part of that is to rethink what specializations mean for a class and whether or not talent rows are a deep enough system to supplement it. I don't think returning to the ever-expanding tree of WoW's old talent system works at this point, but I don't think the current one does either. Adding one more talent row that can be switched on the fly like a piece of equipment isn't what I'd think of as a deep and interesting system, which is why we have these accompanying systems like glyphs and legendaries and whatever else in the first place. But at the same time, the talent system has been that mainstay that defined that idea of class fantasy. It's important to have something like this that defines our character regardless of what equipment they wear. So if there's ever going to be a meaningful shift, it's gonna have to start here. Roleplay be damned. Thanks for watching, or I guess listening. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts in a comment below. I know that this is a pretty heated topic at the moment, so I encourage you to be civil. Please hit that like button to support the channel so that I can keep giving you more of this and all things Warcraft. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, stay safe, stay happy, and stay breezy.